Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of Crit Hit Reviews, with your host, Arlyeon. On today's episode, I'll be talking about Stegosoft Games JRPG, Arafell, specifically the Enhanced Edition. But did this title leave me a quiver, or do I come away feeling the need to knock it? I'm not sorry, Rand. Anyways, to escape from a terrible calamity, the land of Arafell was thrust into the heavens. And yet, its denizens failed to escape every threat, their now isolated world succumbing to a great battle between elves and vampires. In the end, only the elves faded into legend, leaving the vampires to linger behind, a fact that our plucky heroine Lita Lakota becomes duly familiar with after a bout of impromptu dungeon exploration leads to her unearthing an ancient artifact that may be tied to both the history of the island as well as its ultimate fate. Now, I will take a moment to say that despite the somewhat serious premise of the synopsis, the game generally leans towards being more lighthearted. That's not to say it doesn't find room for tragedy-oriented plot developments and character growth, but by and large, I found it to be a pretty upbeat adventure with a lot of funny and enjoyable moments. Also, there's a lot of snarking going on, and I'm entirely there for it. That said, what I found especially nifty was the fact that it managed to avoid the sometimes crippling hurdle that other RPGs have, as it grants you the ability to skip cutscenes. Considering that there's a number of bosses with cutscenes leading up to them, this little element felt like a major quality of life improvement. Which helped a fair bit, given that as far as JRPG-style games go, this one can be a bit rough. Partly due to the entirety of my playthrough being on its highest difficulty setting for an achievement, and because I'm an idiot. Yes, I could have opted out at any time, so props to that since the difficulty is adjustable, but frankly, I was committed to my poor choices, and it did ensure I became more acquainted with its systems. Especially given there's a good number of rough combat encounters, both spread across the main game as well as scattered about the various side quests which crop up over the course of your travels. I mean, sure, some are as simple to complete as delivering some flour, but others have you facing off against some pretty vicious and well-composed enemy teams. All the same, I didn't find the overall experience unfair, as the game provides a number of avenues to grow stronger and a large number of rewards for players who dive headlong into the world. For one thing, there's the relics, which provide permanent passive boosts to all of a player's characters so long as they keep a hold of them. Given that these range from small to large stat boosts, things like increased potion efficacy, or simply refusing to go unconscious once per fight per character, there's some pretty potent options at play which certainly added to my motivation to explore. That said, I also found myself motivated due to the foraging system, as it provides diligent players the ability to gather materials, which can then be used to craft items. It behooved me to get as familiar with this as I could, given the players don't actually get stronger vis-a-vis buying gear, instead you're actually tasked with crafting upgrades to what they're wearing. And considering just how dramatically they escalated after a bit of work goes into them, I found myself scouring every nook and cranny for the materials needed. Honestly, I sometimes even ventured into areas I had little business in tackling yet, if only so I could try and ramp up my equipment a bit earlier than I was meant to. Thankfully, the game does help a bit to enable this bit of daring, since Arafell lacks random encounters, enabling you to see enemies on the world map and thus navigate around them. What's more, it's not even necessarily the end of the world if you do get caught, as I found that in a number of circumstances, getting wiped out in trash fights didn't set back my progress by much, since it didn't result in a game over all the time, which made things altogether relaxed. What's more, the game is pretty forgiving with both its autosaves and the ability to save anywhere, which helps for the more story-centric encounters. It might also be why I messed around making really dumb character builds, since the game provides you a few avenues to customize your characters and their kits. The one you'd be introduced to earliest is leveling, as rather than providing players with fixed character bonuses, you're granted a handful of points to spend in whatever you choose, which entirely enables the sort of stupidity like making dodgy healer builds, glass cannons, or just making the chunkiest of tanks. To that end, the enchantment crafting system helps to provide a lot of interesting options to boot. I mean, Yes, the options are pretty straightforward at first, but as you discover secret recipes and buy others, you begin to accrue a small library of character-enhancing options, which lend themselves to all sorts of builds and strategies. Between that and the slowly growing number of enchantment slots you can hold on a character, there's some pretty neat options that pop up. Now, what should tie all of this together is the advanced classes you acquire for your corte of protagonists. At a glance, they're generally interesting options, the likes of which you receive as reward for completing a set of optional quests, given they tend to provide both some upfront changes to your characters, but also provide you some unique upgrade paths. The only problem is you don't actually have much in the way of knowing just what options they'll be providing you without picking one, looking over all their skills, and then reloading to try and get your bearings on those skills and what the alternative one would be providing. And what's more, while you do have the option of respeccing your character's stats, albeit for an exponentially more expensive fee, you're not able to do that for your advanced class, nor the skills you've chosen for it. And this is pretty important, since while the basic upgrades to your skills are straightforward, your advanced class skills have multiple upgrade routes, and it can sometimes be a bit more difficult to truly get a bearing on just how efficient or inefficient they are in tandem with your skills and the skills of your other characters until later. Honestly, the only other nitpick that I can think of was simply the manner in which a lot of the later fights began to simplify. It's only because the trash fights don't quite contain as many interesting mechanics and began to degenerate into just how quickly can I melt these weenies. Still, I did enjoy beating them up, and I'll admit, the game did make the process of running around the map extremely convenient. Not just because there's a handy map so I could keep my bearings, but also by virtue of the fast travel system that it had in place, just so I didn't have to deal with an excessive amount of backtracking. Now, on a visual front, I was a fan of the sprite work in this game, though what I found truly endearing was the character portraits during dialogues. There's a pretty decent range of emotes for the various characters, and it definitely helps emphasize its altogether humorous vibe. Furthermore, the overall presentation felt a lot cleaner and overall visually appealing in this enhanced version than its original iteration. And, I was also just a fan of the sound design in this game, as there's some lovely tunes to accompany your various acts of wanton heroism. But let's actually boil all this down for my final thoughts, shall we? As far as titles go, I am rather fond of Arafell. The storyline is a fun romp through a fantastic floating isle, and the protagonists, both their dialogue and dynamics, were enjoyable to follow along. On a gameplay front, I was generally a fan of the game, though I'll admit that as far as the combat went, I tended to find the bosses the most interesting element, if only because they had some distinctly dangerous and noteworthy patterns. That said, the whole process of fine-tuning your team and exploring made for a fair bit of fun, and definitely contributed to a decent chunk of my playtime, as I scoured the world for secrets. Ultimately, I did come away from the game feeling that Arafell was a hit, a title I could generally recommend to friends, though not one I felt the ceaseless urge to gush about. Anywho, thanks for tuning in. If you agree, disagree, or just have something to say to me, feel free to comment. And for those interested in more indie reviews, developer interviews, podcasts, or Monday TTRPG content, hit the subscribe button and the bell so you know there's a new release. There's also a Discord, you can click the link in the banner or description so you're a part of our community, the Crit Hit Cauldron. Lastly, if you'd like to help support the channel, we do have a Ko-fi running now to help supplement funds for a lovely editor and make sure we can continue to provide quality content. Again, check the description and the banner for them links. That said, I'll catch you on the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then, folks.